everyone, and welcome to another episode of Speaking Volumes, Books, Writing, and the World of Publishing. I am your host, Renee McMillan, and I am very excited today to welcome author Madeline Martin to the program. Now, Madeline Martin, she is usually an author of historical romance books, but today we are talking about her debut historical fiction called The Last Bookshop in London. I'm very excited about it because as a former bookseller, I love talking about books and also bookstores. So this is a very exciting book for me to be talking about. Madeline is a New York Times and USA Today best-selling author of, as I mentioned, historical romance and now historical fiction. Her books have strong heroines and high-action plot twists. They have finaled in the Holt Medallion and National Excellence in Romance Fiction Award. That was a weird sentence. And she is currently joining us from Florida, which is not as sunny right now, a little windy, she said, but Madeline, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much for having me, Renee. I've been really looking forward to it.
Likewise, yes. So I just want to start off asking a couple questions to help the viewers get to know you a little bit more. How did you know that you wanted to be a writer? What was sort of your catalyst moment, and how did you start your writing career?
So I've always been an avid reader, the kind of reader that's like a book a day sort of a reader. And I think that with inputting so many stories into my head constantly, I think I just always sort of had stories sort of coming right back. You know what I mean? So even when I was in elementary school, I actually would draw. I would draw stories. And then as I got older, like in middle school, I actually wrote full stories with chapters and a dedication page. And I even made a cover out of like cardboard and cloth for one of them. And I always have these little stories that I kind of started. So I think that I've always kind of had that desire to write books and tell stories. So really as far back as I can remember.
I was one of those kids as well where, you know, and I just feel like I just saw a tweet about this too, where someone tweeted that, you know, they were writing a story as a kid and they had 6 pages and they're like, it's almost done. And you look back at that, you're like, oh, sweet child. 6 pages. Yeah, that'd be great.
Back when writing was so much easier.
Right, yeah, it's like, this book is awesome. Yeah, well, that's great. Yeah, and I always love hearing stories about, you made your own cover and, oh, great. And then you find those later and you're like, oh man, that's just going to stay there. What is your favorite place to go to write?
Honestly, at home, like right here in my office. And it's really, a lot of it has to do with the fact, well, 2 main reasons. One is because everything is kind of ergonomic, and I've had the last 3 years I've written 8 books a year, and then this year I'm slated to have written 7 books this year. And the first 3 years of that were writing or working full time too. So my wrists and my back and my hips pretty much hate me at this point. So everything is like ergonomic keyboard, the weird ergonomic mouse that no one can figure out but me, you know, the lumbar pillow that my cat likes to steal. So that's number 1. But number 2 is when I'm writing, I do like a full immersion sort of writing where I'm 360 degrees into the story. So if I have a character who's angry, I'm angrily writing. And like, if I'm at a sad scene, I'm like crying while I'm writing. And I can't do that when I go to Starbucks, or if I have somebody, like glaring at somebody, sometimes I'll do the facial expressions. So I can see like what it feels like. So I'll kind of glare, and I don't want somebody's like, oh my gosh, does that woman hate me? Why is she glaring at me? Yeah. So I generally like to really just stay home.
That's fair. Yeah, I understand that too, because sometimes I'm like, how do I describe this? And then you make the face. And you're like,
right.
So, you definitely don't want to be that person at the coffee shop.
The one that's always glaring at people from their corner, you know.
Right, yeah. Like, I mean, sometimes I am that person if I'm just having a bad day, but generally, don't want that. Yeah. So like I mentioned in the introduction, you primarily have kind of written historical romance. Right. And the Last Bookshop in London is your sort of first foray into historical fiction with, you know, you can have romance in a non-romance book, but obviously it's not the forefront. How did that come about? Was it something that you always wanted to, you kind of planned to do in your writing career, or did it just kind of suddenly happen and you had this idea?
It's definitely something that I eventually did want to do. I've always, historical fiction actually are some of my first books that I really started reading. My favorite series of all time was The Little House in the Big Woods series by Lauren Ingalls Wilder. And ever since then, I've always just been completely addicted to historical fiction. And for me, like with doing historical romance and getting to do so much research, because I do medieval, I do 17th century, and I also do Regency, I just started to realize that I wanted to talk more about the history. And so I thought to myself, one day I really want to write historical fiction where I can just throw all of my historical knowledge that I'm gleaning from this research and put it into a book and really make it forefront. And so that's what I really got to sort of showcase with the Last Bookshop in London.
Very nice. And speaking of, well, of course we're here speaking of Last Bookshop in London, where did this specific idea come from about focusing on the Last Bookshop in London? Was there, I don't know, is there any like truth to this? Because, obviously you're writing about World War II and a lot of the things in your book did happen. Was there an actual sort of bookshop that kind of, was the last bookstore standing in an area of London, or?
No, it wasn't about one specific bookshop per se, but I did see an article that sort of was, my inspiration for this story. And it was talking about the Paternoster Row bombing. And it was a whole entire publishing district in London. And it just got completely annihilated by bombers and incendiaries. And it actually destroyed over 5 million books in that night. And they were going through a paper shortage at the time because everything was on shortage with the war on. And so you couldn't just replace those books, and so it really was very devastating for the publishing community. And so it just made me kind of think about community coming together around books, and how like maybe one small little bookshop might make such a huge difference in the lives of so many different people.
Yeah, that was something I really loved, just that theme throughout the whole book, that Grace is obviously, she's stuck in the middle of this war, and she's having a lot of these feelings of, what can I do? I'm not helping enough. But then that through working at this bookshop and bringing people together around books and stories was something that was really impactful on these people that are going through this terrible time. And it was a little kind of ray of hope. I really loved that element to the book, that was just, you're bringing this community together around books, because books do have that ability to really be a light in the dark.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah. Were you drafting and kind of writing this book through the first full year of the pandemic that we had? Is that kind
Absolutely, I was. And it very much impacted the things that I wrote. It really felt like I was able to connect with Grace's character on a completely different level than if we had been going through a time of normalcy. So like, for example, the hoarding and people wishing that they could just wish life back to being normal again. There really was so much more of a connection that I was able to make with the characters, and also just even like really the mood of the culture and everything, than based off of what we were going through. And obviously there's a huge difference between pandemic and being bombed nightly, but it is still very devastating to the community, and people are still going to have certain reactions, and you're going to have people that have good ones, and you're going to have ones that have bad ones as well. So yeah, it was very, very influential in my writing of this book.
I definitely picked up on that. It was, maybe even just 2 or 3 chapters in, and she's already having these thoughts of, oh, well, life isn't really, there's a war going on, but life doesn't feel that different. And then slowly things do start to change, obviously. But yeah, I definitely picked up on that very early, that I was like, this is kind of what we're living through and have been living through over the last years. So I was curious if that, helped, because I know a lot of people, all these events that we've been doing with authors virtually over the pandemic year, a big question has been, how has the pandemic impacted your writing? Has it been harder? But like I said, I wondered if kind of going through a similar time had made it easier on you if you were drafting at that time. So
Right. And the thing is, I read through a lot of diary entries when I was doing research for this book, diary entries from various different people, all walks of life. And really a lot of the things that I mentioned in there that we had struggled with the pandemic really were things they actually even talked about too. People hoarding and being tired of everything and just wanting life to be normal again and all of those same kind of things. And so it really was so easy to connect with that on such a relatable level.
Yeah, definitely. Speaking of research, did you get to, well, maybe not during the pandemic, but before, had you spent time in London or the UK and gotten a chance to get a feel for, the city of London, obviously not in World War II times, but at least the city and maybe some of the scars that had been left from the bombings and just learn the history a bit more? Did you get a chance to do that at all?
So I have been to London several times. I'm an Army brat, and I was over in Germany over 3 different tours with my dad. And so I have been to London several times. In fact, I actually was very lucky and got to celebrate the turn of the millennium at Big Ben. And so unfortunately, though, I never actually went there with World War II history in mind. So, of course, I have major regrets on that now. And I do want to go back and kind of walk through the city and see a lot of things. Like, for example, they have these iron gates. Well, they got rid of all the iron gates, rather, because they needed to melt it all down for ammunition and everything else. So they put these metal gates in its place. And if you look at it from the side, it's kind of like this. And then when you turn it on its side and it goes in, it makes a fence. But then when there's a bombing, you can take it off, flip it over, and it's a stretcher. And they actually still have them all over London. And so I want to go on a fence find, and try to see how many I can find. And, you can find like places where shrapnel took out chunks of buildings. And I mean, there's a lot of sort of mementos still left behind from the Blitz and from World War II and everything.
Yeah. I saw you tweet recently that you just recently booked a ticket to go to the UK for research on a new book you're working on.
I wish it was the UK. I actually am hoping to book for my next book is going to take place in France and Portugal.
Okay.
So I'm hoping that those both open up in time for me to be able to travel to get that into my book. But I actually booked this one to DC because one of my heroines is going to be American. And so I want to get some background research because she's going to be from DC. So that's as close as I can get right now. And I'm crossing my fingers that I can get to the rest of it.
Yes, hopefully. My fingers are crossed for you as well. Because that would be a great, like you said, just to really experience it yourself and be able to put that realism into the book a bit more than just doing a Google search.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So this book is set during World War II, of course. Starts right as things kind of get going. There's a lot of books that are set during World War II. What about your book do you think offers readers that they might not find in other books set in this time period? What did you kind of try and put in this book to make it special?
Well, I mean, to be honest with you, I really didn't think about trying to put anything specific in to make it special. I just wrote the book from my heart. You just kind of try to write it and hope that it's going to be an enjoyable book. And I hope that people would find a lot of interest in it, like I did with the research. But I know that one big thing is that with the fact that Grace kind of started off not being a reader, and I did that intentionally, and I sort of pulled from my romance author box of tools there, where with romance, people read that and they do that so that they can experience the joy of falling in love over and over and over again. So I wanted people to be able to see reading from Grace's perspective, where they saw her open that first book and get sucked in and then fall head over heels into this world of love with books. And I wanted people to experience that love of reading for the first time all over again through her eyes. So I think that probably is going to be something that is sort of distinguish it from other books about World War II. And I've also heard that apparently it's way more hopeful than a lot of World War II books are. And I didn't set out to make it that way. But a lot of people have said it's almost like a big warm hug.
Yeah.
So I guess you don't typically think about a World War II book feeling like a big warm hug. but I'm glad
not usually. That's not the first thing that would come to mind thinking about World War II. So
but people really do like the hope and everything that it really does leave behind, especially with the pandemic and everything.
Yeah, I was going to say again, it's kind of the type of book that we need right now is something that kind of lifts you up a bit more.
Right.
So and I think just as you were talking, I was kind of thinking, I was like, so it's not really a World War II book. It's more sort of a love letter to the finding the love of reading, and just again, like the power that reading can have, both
and classic literature and what it really means to people and everything.
It just happens to be set during World War II.
Yes. Which is really like one of my favorite time periods. I really enjoy just doing research on World War II.
Yeah, that kind of segues perfectly into another question I had. As I mentioned, there are many books that are set during World War II, and in a lot of different that focus on a lot of different things that were happening during that time, and different groups of people and all of that. What do you think the fascination is? Like, what about World War II just makes it so fascinating, and so many people want to kind of dissect it and study it?
I think the fact that it really first of all, the fact that it was impactful of the entire world. I mean, that really is huge. Mm-hmm. But then also when you just think about the hardships that people really faced with that, and the suffering that so many people endured, and how many people were able to survive and still have hope, even when they're in the most hopeless sort of situations, and just the things that they did to survive and to help other people. I can't tell you, it's to think about these people who sacrificed their children and their lives and everything to save other people. That's incredible. It's one thing to say, oh, I would definitely do that. But when you think about, well, what if my children get killed because I'm doing this? Mm-hmm. Gosh, that's some bravery right there. That is selfless and, completely brave. And that is just really inspiring. And so I think even though it's one of the darkest periods of history, it's also really one of the most inspiring.
Yeah, definitely an opportunity that really highlights sort of the strength of the human spirit, and what you can discover about yourself and your community, even though you're going through such a terrible time.
Right, absolutely.
Yeah, I like that. All right, let's talk about some fun stuff now. So I loved the story behind how Mr. Evans created Primrose Hill books.
Mm-hmm.
It was just like a paragraph in the book, and I was like, oh my God, I shouldn't smack my mic, but oh my gosh, my heart, that is the sweetest story ever. Aww. Did you just come up with that, or was there some sort of real life? Because it's so beautiful. I just loved it.
Thank you. Yeah, I actually just kind of came up with it. I just thought Primrose Hill was kind of a cute name for a bookshop. And, but I was like, well, I don't want it set on Primrose Hill though, because I spent so much time researching the ideal location, not only for Grace to live, but also for the bookshop to be located, because I needed it to be close enough to Paternoster Row. It was very, very complicated. I probably took about 3 months just to pinpoint the individual locations. Mm-hmm. So I didn't want to relocate, the bookshop on Hoosier Lane to Primrose Hill. Mm-hmm. So I thought, oh, well, what if I make a cute little story kind of to go with it? Yeah. And so that's where the idea for that came from. And I liked the idea that it gave Mr. Evans initially, just right off the bat, a softer side. So you knew that he wasn't just a total grumpy curmudgeon, that there really was some soft goo on the inside of that hard exterior.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, like I said, I just was like, that's the most beautiful story ever. Everyone should be so fortunate to have a meet cute like that.
Thank you. I know. And I was thinking, oh, how romantic would it be to have something like that happen? And I was like, oh, that would be so cute for Mr. Evans.
Right. Yes. Yeah. And and those are almost kind of my favorite characters, like the characters that start off and they seem very curmudgeonly and just like, I just want to be left alone. You're like, I know there's a different side to you.
Yes. And then your character can worm their way into their hearts, even though they don't want it to happen. I love it.
Yeah. That's my favorite. Is Primrose Hill Books, like the shop itself, have you kind of visited stores that were your inspiration to, sort of start it off? Or did you just kind of think, okay, I've been to bookstores that kind of have their act together. What's the exact opposite of that? And just kind of created that.
Well, there have definitely been some pretty crazy bookshops in Europe that I have gone to where it really is just, well, in America too, where there are just piles of books everywhere. There's no rhyme or reason to anything. And those almost have sort of like a certain little magical quality to them. It's like, if you go up to an attic and you're like, boxes, and you're like, oh, what are in these boxes? And so there's something kind of magical about that. So I wanted to start off the bookshop like that and have it be sort of like this crazy mess that she has to tackle. And I almost felt like that was almost sort of like the unveiling of all of the books that she ends up encountering. So as the bookshop is really kind of being cleaned up, she's also sort of finding her love for books as well.
Right. Yeah. I was definitely, it really spoke to the bookseller in me that all the, the bits, the passages where Grace is, she's going to other bookshops to look at how they display their books and how they organize. And then, she's cleaning up. I was like, oh, I so want to be back in a bookstore, like doing displays. And, so it was, you really captured that, that desire, I think in the passages. Yeah.
Well, and funny thing about the displays too, they actually did use those kind of pasteboard displays at that time. I did a lot of research. In fact, I would, because I could look at pictures online. So I had a magnifying glass that I would keep next to my computer. And then whenever I would pull up a picture of a bookshop or something, I could take it and, kind of peer inside. And they had these little pasteboard things where it really was saying things like, lighten up your blackout with a good book and all these sort of slogans. And they really did use those. So it was fun to incorporate those into the book as well.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. What did you, for the books that Grace reads, like you're kind of focusing on that classic literature, the things that were big at the time. Was there sort of did you have a system for what books you kind of wanted to feature? Like you talked about Middlemarch and Emma was in there. Are these books that like you yourself have read that you liked, or did you just kind of, pick some classic literature books to put in there?
So these are actually, all these books are ones that have an impact, that had an impact on my life at some point or another that I've read. And honestly, I'm not going to lie, I think most of them I read in high school, but going through and just thinking about which ones I really wanted to incorporate. I will say that The Count of Monte Cristo, that suggestion came from my father. He was like, oh, you have to include The Count of Monte Cristo. That was my all-time favorite book. And the reason I thought it would be so perfect too is because obviously George recommends it to Grace. And so George wouldn't really probably be recommending Emma or, Pride and Prejudice or Jane Eyre or something. And so I thought that it really would be perfect for him to use The Count of Monte Cristo. And it really ended up just being the perfect book for the whole scenario.
Yeah, definitely. There's a few classics that people have mentioned to me, and I'm not like a classic hater or anything, but sometimes I'm like, okay, let's maybe, temper down our love of the classics. Like they're not the best thing in the world. Like there's a lot of great books that people have written since then.
Oh, yeah, no, I completely agree.
but some people, like people have mentioned Master and Margarita to me, and Count of Monte Cristo. And so when I kind of hear people, and people that I respect their reading, and they mention to me that, oh no, it is great, you'd love it, I kind of think, okay, like I can carve out a little bit of reading time for the classics, because there are plenty of classics I know that still are kind of worth their salt and have their importance. So
Right, absolutely. And it's interesting just how far they take it sometimes. Like I don't know, Brave New World is one for me. If you read that book, you would never think that it was written like, I think it was back 1930.
Yeah.
It's incredible when you read through it and you're like, it feels so modern. It feels like such a modern concept. But so that's one of the things that I just think is fascinating. But I have a couple girlfriends who we're all best friends. And so we do like a classic book a month that we read. And it's really interesting reading through it. And it's nice because we all are 100% honest with each other. So, some of those things you can be like, literally, I did not get this book at all. Like, I know there's probably some existentialism, blah, blah, blah kind of thing about this, but it's way over my head. And it's like, you feel comfortable being able to say that, which is nice. So our last book we did was Dracula, which was very interesting.
Oh, yeah. That would be another one. Yeah. Just because you think about all the iterations and movies and all this stuff that it was inspired by it.
Oh man, talk about some world building. Oh my goodness. I mean, that whole world that he built is still being used all these, like, what is it, like, I mean, 100 years, 200 years later? I can't remember when it was published.
At least 100, I think.
Yeah, I mean, it's really incredible. So.
Well, yeah, and you think, same with like Mary Shelley and Frankenstein. It's just endured so many years. Yeah, so.
Yeah, we actually have a list that we pull from, and we select the whole list and we put it into a random generator. So Crime and Punishment is next. We start on June 1st.
I don't think I ever read Crime and Punishment. I'm trying to think back to my,
I know.
British literature class in college, the books that we read. I don't think that was on there.
Yeah, I haven't read Crime and Punishment, and I'm looking forward to it. It sounds really interesting. It's like a classic thriller. So, yeah.
Well, and like you were saying about Brave New World, there's always, I feel like for every time period, there's always going to be a handful of people that were kind of before their time with whatever they were doing. So, yeah. Definitely find those people. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
All right, I have to ask another question, another sort of fun question, but also sad question, I guess. So you have George and Colin in the book. There we go.
Mm-hmm.
And I tweeted about it, and I know you saw it because you laughed at it. But when Colin came on, my first reaction, I was like, he's going to be the love interest. He's, but that was not the case. I'll just leave it at that. Did you like debate between maybe having Colin be a sort of love interest for Grace, or did you always know it was going to be George?
I always knew it was going to be George. Yeah. And so Colin kind of had his place in my story. I really was inspired with a lot of these characters from people who I read about when I was reading in a lot of these diaries, doing my research. And one particular woman had written about her son who was getting ready to go to war. Mm-hmm. And he was sitting there next to their dog, and he was stroking its velvety long ear. Mm-hmm. And he was thinking, and she was thinking to herself, he's too gentle for war. Mm-hmm. And her heart was breaking at the thought of her gentle son having to go off and face these atrocities of war. And she's like, he would never shoot somebody. Like, how is he even going to live? Mm-hmm. And so that's where my idea for Colin came in. Yeah. And so Colin was always meant to be a friend and just a sweet man, Yeah.
So it's one of those, kind of cinnamon roll characters as they're known today. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yes. Well, he's a man after my own heart. Anyone who's taking care of animals and just being, a kind, loving soul. Yeah.
But yes, that's absolutely, I felt like that woman's son needed to be represented and just kind of, have his part in history. And so that's why I wanted to put Colin in the story.
Yeah, definitely. Mm-hmm. Did you, this is maybe a silly question, but did you find yourself wanting to go and reread or rewatch, Chronicles of Narnia when you were working on this book? Because maybe that's just the only thing my brain goes to with World War II stuff, but you were talking about sending the children to the country and carrying the gas masks in the box, which, by the way, thank you, because every time I would watch the movie and they had those, I was like, what are those things they're carrying? And in my head I was like, oh, maybe they're like a lunchbox. And then you talked about the gas masks in your book. I was like, oh, that's what those are. So
to be honest with you, I completely forgot that Narnia was even during World War II.
Yeah.
Completely. Until you mentioned that, I completely, no, this all really was just from research. I mean, the kids that were sent away from London, they didn't get really the all clear to come back until almost 6 years later.
Yeah.
So it's just really incredible how long they were gone for.
Yeah, definitely.
So, mm-hmm.
And was there kind of an age limit that they put on the children that were sent? 15?
There was an age limit. I can't remember off the top of my head I think maybe 15 or something. Yeah. But I do know that children under 5 could bring their mothers with them. Mm. And that apparently caused a lot of strife because you basically had 2 moms in a household, and that doesn't always work out well because, there's only one queen of the roost, sort of.
Right.
And, but pregnant women also went, as well as people who had disabilities, they were told to go as well. So when they very first started, early in September 1st, 1939, they had 3.75 million people that were actually displaced.
Gosh.
So that's like huge.
Yeah.
And that number, would come and go depending on, so obviously during the Boer War in the very beginning, when there really was nothing going on, a lot of people ended up coming back home. And then obviously when the Blitz started and the bombings were especially every single night, people didn't want to keep their children in London because it wasn't safe. So they sent them home, or they sent them away again. And it's so easy for us now. I feel like we're so much more mobile now than they used to be then. Like, you couldn't just be like, oh, well, we're just going to all move from London and go live in, Dorchester or something. You couldn't just do that. Your whole life was in London. You had your home, you had your job. You couldn't just leave. So that's why a lot of times these kids were sent away, because you think, do I keep my kid here and they die, or can I at least keep them safe? And so that's why they did that. But I can't imagine as a mother having to make that kind of decision to not live with my child or have my child potentially die. I mean, it's just horrible.
Yeah.
So very devastating.
Yeah. And also just thinking about, 6 years after things have kind of, ended, but they didn't get the all clear, and thinking how young some of these kids are, and to just the time that you're away for the war itself, and then another 6 years, like that's a whole lot of life for a kid. Like
your childhood. I mean, if you think about like a 6-year-old that leaves and they come back when they're 12.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. Like I can't even imagine. And, a lot of these kids came from big cities and they went to the country having never been to the country before. Some of them didn't know what a cow was.
Yeah.
I mean, it's so wild.
Yeah. That is, just bizarre. And then, like you said, thinking of being a parent, a mother, whoever, and having to send your child away. I was sitting there reading, I was like, it's got to be a super hard choice to either keep your child with you, but then potentially be putting them in harm's way, or send them away and you don't see them. But my other thought too was, I mean, and it's just a hard decision all around. But if you send them away, they're safe. But then if something happens to you, you're still potentially leaving them with no one. If no one takes them, that's just, it
is such a bad situation, especially when, like I said, you really couldn't just up and move. So, and they certainly didn't have remote working then, so you couldn't like, oh, I'll keep my job in London and I'll come over here. So
something is happening with my system. What? Oh,
there you go.
That was weird.
Hello. Welcome back.
I'm back. All right, we'll fix it in editing. Yes. Yeah. World War II was rough. I mean, it was a world war after all. What else is in the future for you now? Like you said, you're writing another book, and she's an American heroine. Can you, what degree of information are you allowed to give us about that, or is it still pretty
it really is, it's going to be dual narration, and like I said, I'm going to have one character in France and one character who's going to be in Portugal, and that's about all I can really divulge right now, but it will definitely be coming out next year. So just people can, I will be sharing everything as I know information on social media, on my website, which I'm having redesigned. So if you pull it up and it takes 10,000 years, that hasn't been updated yet. If you pull it up and it comes up right away and it's beautiful, that means that my website is done. But it'll probably be like another 2 weeks or so until we get to that point. So, but yeah, it's, I will be sharing everything as soon as I can because I'm super excited about it too.
Yes. And Last Bookshop in London it came out, when was the pub date?
April 6th.
It's been a little while. April 6th, so it is on shelves now.
Yes. And it just hit Target, which makes me so excited.
Hooray!
It's one of those small things, but when I first started really writing books and everything, and I would walk into Target, there's only so many books on those shelves, and I would think to myself, one day my books are going to be on Target shelves. And so I finally got to go and see my book at Target, and it was a huge moment for me.
And that is kind of, I mean, and like, it is great, like a milestone. It's fantastic. It just kind of, it makes me chuckle a little bit because of course we're all very pro bookstore, indie bookstore, but then to have that just, secret but you're like, but I want to be in Target too.
Yes, exactly. But I definitely do always support like local. In fact, if anybody is looking for a signed copy of The Last Bookshop in London, you can actually order it from the Bookmark at Neptune Beach. I have signed a bunch of them and they have them there. So that's one way to get them. And also definitely supporting local.
Yes, anywhere you're at. We're
Yes.
proponents of supporting local.
Absolutely.
I forgot to do this at the beginning. I usually try and do it at the beginning, at the end. But if you are interested in finding out more information about Madeline's, either this book, The Last Bookshop in London, or any of her other books, we encourage that you go to indiebound.org and try and find a local bookstore in your area to support. You can also go to bookshop.org and order whatever, Madeline's books, whatever other book you would like to your heart's content, and a portion of your sales will go towards supporting local bookstores across the country. So
yes, and also for local bookstores too, or even if you go to a local bookstore and you love them, you can tell them this. I will send as many book plates, signed book plates as needed for any bookstores that need them, the indie books. So just an FYI there. You guys can always reach out to me on any of my social media platforms.
Yes, and we will feature all of Madeline's social media and her website in our end credits. So if you're wondering what those are, we'll put them on screen for you. Don't worry.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Well, our timer is counting down. That's all my questions. I've been very much enjoying the book. This is maybe one of the first books I've read in a while. And of course, it's been a weird year and reading has just been, I think, weird for all of us. But this was the first book I feel like I picked up recently that really just allowed me to sink into the characters and just kind of enjoy, get that joy of reading back, which seems very appropriate for this book since it's kind of all about that.
Oh, well, that really warms my heart. Thank you so much for letting me do that.
Thank you for writing this book. And my mother and I actually read it together, so it was kind of a nice book for us to read together, and we can talk about it.
Read books together too, and I love doing that.
Isn't it nice? Yeah, we're both not super big book club people, but we decided one day we could just do a book club with the two of us. That's fine. So, yeah.
I think that's perfect.
Yeah. So again, we have been talking with Madeline Martin. She's the author of The Last Bookshop in London. You don't have a copy there, do you? I, of course, don't have one with me.
I do.
There it is. The beautiful cover.
Thank you. It is very much a beautiful cover. The cover gods were very gracious.
Right. They blessed you with a beautiful cover.
They really did. It's such a stunning cover. And then I really like how when I got the paperback one, I don't know if you can tell, but it's embossed.
Oh, is it?
So, yeah, when I opened up, I was like, oh, they embossed it. Yeah. It made my whole day seeing that. It was so pretty.
These are the weird things that authors and booksellers, I think, get very excited about. They're like, oh, it's embossed. And
I know.
Yeah. Maybe normal people don't understand, but I understand, Madeline.
Thank you.
Yeah. So yes, Last Bookshop in London, it's on shelves now. Like I said, we encourage you to go to your indie bookstore. If you have one around, you can use indiebound.org to find one near you. Even if they're not in driving distance of you, most bookstores these days do have web stores. So you can look into that information using indiebound.org, as I mentioned, or bookshop.org. And purchasing from them will help indie bookstores across the country. So spread the love. Madeline, thank you so much for spending this Saturday morning with us. It has been lovely talking to you and just learning some things for me about World War II that I didn't know. So thank you so much.
Well, thank you so much, Renee, and for everyone else who tuned in. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Yes. Like I mentioned, we will put Madeline's social media, her website, up in our end credits. So if you want to find out more about her and the things that she's up to, you will be able to do so on social media. Otherwise, thank you so much for tuning into this episode of Speaking Volumes, and we will see you next time.